You usually have a kind of manifesto that would kind of drive a lot of choices for the season. It came from really the showrunner, from Bill Lawrence, and the writers, and also the producing director. And then it's a way of interpreting those ideas. That could mean there's a bit more hope. That means there's a little bit more movement or direction in terms of, being able to make progress. You're not static. The lighting's a little bit aspirationally hopeful, and there's a little bit more positivity in terms of the lighting, and having an overarching idea keeps you kind of in check, making sure that you're kind of consistent with what you're doing.
Hi, I am Chad Anderson, one of the hosts at Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify their skill set. You can learn more on filmmakeru.com or follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we are delighted to interview a film and TV professional, and this week we are pleased to be joined by cinematographer John Brawley, whose work includes Bad Monkey, The Morning Show, and obviously most recently this touching dramedy. Would we call it a dramedy? This series, which everyone seems to fall in love with, Shrinking. This is a fantastic show. We're several seasons deep and we're into it. John, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Cool, cool, cool. So you came in from the second season. So the first season was not you as cinematographer. So this show was kind of already a little bit in motion. What goes in for you to picking up from a show? And you've done this on a couple of occasions where you've kind of taken over. You've been the predominant cinematographer, as far as I know, for all of the second and third season. What goes into picking up from another season into a show like this, where you have to kind of work with something that's already established format and pace and ideas in there?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting role because, and you're right, it has happened for me a couple of times where you're coming into a show that already has had some success and has a following, and so you want to be very conscious of you're inheriting a lot of choices that somebody else has made, or another team has made, and some of those team are coming forward on the second season, and so I always think of it as a kind of evolving and cherry picking, like what worked and what didn't. So I usually start off, and this usually starts at the kind of when you're interviewing for the job. I usually try and talk about what worked and what didn't work. Try to find a way to talk about the show's strengths and play into those, and also find out what is the direction of the next season. The first season of Shrinking, for example, was about grief, and the second season was about forgiveness, and so that already gives you a point of difference as a series arc to kind of do things differently. And so that means you can make some different choices. You don't have to be beholden to those first season choices necessarily. You just have to be smart about how you evolve that, and what kind of steps you're going to take to make sure that you kind of honor the first season, but also let it grow in a way and let it develop. And that just comes out of a lot of conversations with the showrunner, with the writers, with the directors, the producing directors as well, just about where to take the show and what you're going to do differently, and what you're going to keep in terms of motifs and ideas.
Yeah, so it's interesting because that was my next question. You mentioned, and it's well phrased, and I wonder if this came from you or came from the showrunners. I'm always interested in the ideas of tone from the showrunners. You made a good point that, yeah, if I was to encapsulate the first season, I would say, yeah, I guess grief would be that. I was trying to figure out with the second season's tone would be. And you said forgiveness. My first thought was embarrassment,
Yeah.
because there's so much in the show
I think
that's
that's just one of the
awkward and
comic
uncomfortable.
engines. Yeah.
I
I
feel
think
like
that's
that's an
where
overarching
a lot of
theme.
comedy comes from, right? Is because of that embarrassment. Yeah, I mean, Forgiveness tonally was the series arc, and for season three, it's actually moving forward, or
I
moving
was gonna
on,
say
getting forward.
for season three, I was gonna say like progress, or some
Mhm.
word, but moving forward works for me. How do you interpret that from the cinematography point of view, from a camera point of view, or from a lens point of view, that tone, whether it be forgiveness or growth, I guess.
I mean, it informs everything, right? Because what I like to do is you usually have a kind of manifesto or a set of ideas that you might have that would kind of drive a lot of choices for the season. And so it comes out of storytelling thematics, which, as I say, came from really the showrunner, from Bill Lawrence, and the writers, and also the producing director, and those kind of overarching ideas. And then it's a way of interpreting those ideas. So moving forward, I mean, what does that mean? That could mean there's a bit more hope. That means there's a little bit more movement or direction in terms of being able to make progress. You're not static and stuck. And like season one, for example, it is quite a kind of enclosed kind of space, and we're sort of opening things up now. So maybe the lighting's a little bit more aspirationally hopeful. Maybe the colors are a little bit brighter in terms of the way we light things, and there's a little bit more positivity in terms of the lighting, and however you might want to translate that is how it kind of it gets executed. So that's through lighting, that's through the look design, that's through the lenses we choose, the optics. So I always think of my analogy is that television's kind of like eating at a restaurant. A lot of people have a favorite restaurant, probably. You probably have a restaurant you like going to, and you always like to order the same meal, typically when you go to that restaurant. And audiences don't really like you messing with that too much. If you go in there one day and some other chef has come in and decided to change some of the ingredients, or turn your pizza restaurant into a Mexican restaurant or something, you don't like it. You want actually consistency. And that's the danger, I think, sometimes with television, is we can get a little bit like, oh, we've been doing this for 2 seasons. We should do something different just to be kind of creative. And it's like that's actually not what you want. You want to be consistent. You want to obviously grow and evolve things. So I think of it as the seasonality of a menu. So you might be taking advantage of what's in season, and altering things a little bit. But you really need to kind of keep the same idea thematically, and that kind of manifesto of having an overarching idea keeps you kind of in check with doing that as well, making sure that you're kind of consistent with what you're doing.
So a couple years ago, I had a chance. I was working on something, and I met a guy named David St. Louis, who played the character of Egg on Bad Monkey.
Mhm.
Um, and he mentioned that working with Bill Lawrence was the most rewarding experience of his life, and that Bill Lawrence is a genius. I had a chance to interview the editors from Shrinking about a year ago, and they would reiterate that Bill Lawrence is a genius. How much are you getting a chance to work with Bill Lawrence, and what has your experience been like in terms of that?
I mean, Bill is a kind of savant-like genius for things. Every time he contributes, it meaningfully impacts the scene. You can see it happen. He's very involved with the show, all the shows that I've done with Bill, and he's kind of like this kind of Gandalf-like figure to me, where he kind of comes in and drops a couple of truth. Bombs, and then leaves and goes off to do whatever other 7 other shows that he's working on at the same time. And I don't know exactly how he manages his time, but he certainly is fantastic. You might be familiar with the idea of what a tone meeting is. When you have
Yeah.
in pre-production, right? I call them like each scene has its own tone meeting, because he'll come in usually for the blocking of a scene, and he'll often describe from an intention point of view, what he's hoping for the characters, and he has all the answers for the actors, and it overlaps a lot traditionally, I guess, with those kind of tone meetings that you normally have in pre. And so it's a great kind of reminder, and it's great to be able to listen in on that. He's talking to the actors, and obviously involving the director with that, but he's also, because he's speaking on set, you get to listen in on that. And so you get to hear those intentions as well, which is fantastic creatively, because it means you can obviously track and understand what's happening with the story. So, he really is very involved. He's a very funny guy, obviously in terms of the writing that he does, but also just he's incredibly personal. He's a great leader, and the culture that he has at his company, it all flows from the top, and he's just a great human being.
I do know what a tone meeting is, and something about it is just charming to me. The idea of, we're gonna meet together not to talk about tech and not to talk about like direction, but just kind of like I'm gonna give you an overarching theme, an idea of what this is, what the emotion I'm trying to get from there. And you, the sound people, will handle that in your sound ways, and you, the set designers, will handle your set design ways. It's beautiful to have that collaboration of like, I'm gonna give you an idea. I trust you enough to go into this, into there. In terms of that, I'm always interested in the ideas of the individuals, the kind of multiple personalities or multiple professional artists who are working on a film together, taking that opportunity to interpret this tone into their own creative freedom. And so some directors, and I know there's various directors on a show like Shrinking, but some directors will come in with kind of a firm hand and say, I want to do it this way. But I think the better opportunity is I trust you to envision this the way that you want to envision this. Were there a lot of opportunities for you to say, this scene could be better working it this way and working it from this angle from a cinematography perspective? Did you have that kind of playfulness of kind of coming up with new ideas and kind of collaborating the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I always think of you being a cinematographer in television. One of the main differences between doing feature work is that you are there to coach the directors and guide them a lot more than you would if you're doing a film. Because a lot of the time the guest directors that come in, they may have watched all of it, but it would be a lot, right? If you got a gig, you'd go and sit down and watch 30 hours of something. And they might not have watched everything. They might not know all of the conversations that have been had about a character, why they always enter through that door. So even in terms of the way they block the scenes and understand the scenes, you're there to kind of coach them and shepherd them through and teach them the show, teach them the visual language of the show, but also give them any hints that you might have about the way actors like to work. If somebody likes to prefer to do their close-ups first, or if someone's stronger on their early takes rather than the last takes, or if they prefer to just not rehearse and just do it, or maybe they do. There's all of these other kind of mechanics that go into making a show like this. Then you get to know them, and you get to coach the directors. Now it's up to the directors, of course, to adapt their model of how they like to work to that process, and take that kind of guidance on board or not. It certainly can go both ways, and I'm not there to kind of judge that either. I'm just there to advise and kind of try and coach them through it. So to use the baseball analogy, I think of myself as one of those is it the first base, third base
First
running
base
coaches.
coach.
So you're kind of there whispering and trying to give them the lay of the land, but it's ultimately the director's call to make those choices and so on, and you're just trying to help them out through that.
And you mentioned the idea of how certain characters or certain actors like to be shot or like to have their like to be staged or interacted with, and you're kind of coaching that. There are some fantastic performances in this, whether it be hysterically comedic performances or touching performances. Harrison Ford has some of the funniest moments in this, as well as some of the most tear-jerking moments in this. What has it been like for you to work on a show like this where there are such great performances, and how do you tap into those performances when you see the script or see, a rehearsal run through and say, we got to do this way, we got to get this.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a kind of a model of how we approach scenes, and this goes back to that methodology that we talked about before. And I think this is actually a really unspoken but important part of what we do is creating a kind of a model that everyone gets used to and understands the process and the steps. I mean, that normally there's a certain sequence of calls before a take, and you can see everyone starting to drop in. So by extension, creating the right space, the sequence that we do, the way that we block things, the way that we shoot things, that's all part of that, creating a kind of safe space for the actors to be able to work and do their thing. There is, I mean, it's funny, the scripts are great already. It's inevitable that they get alterations as we go. Like sometimes lines get changed
Sure.
in the blocking, and sometimes they get found by accident when you're in the moment. And we try and have a very kind of open. And we always, the weird thing is like, it's not like they're quite strict about making sure we get the words as written. There's always the base, as Bill likes to call it, do the base, get the actual words as written, and then we can kind of have free play after that. And so having a model where you allow that means that the actors, because Bill likes to cast a lot of, improv comedian type actors that are not strictly capital A actors, but that lets them have some space to kind of, hey, look, do the words as spoken and then you can play later. And everyone has that kind of idea of that model. We always try to, for example, which is a kind of a crime normally for most cinematographers, but we actually start off with a position of how do we cross shoot this? So how do we get both sides of a conversation if it's a two-hander? How do we do that? And we always have two cameras going if we can. And that way the dialogue is more natural because the actors
Hmm.
don't have to worry so much about overlapping because within the take they can kind of interrupt each other and it feels like a more natural conversation. The continuity can match because sometimes the actors will do something a bit different each time, so you've got a take at least then where everything kind of matches. And we often start with shooting maybe not the close-ups, but we might start with the coverage, the medium shots. We don't use that idea which it's probably, I'm going to call it an old-fashioned idea of like starting with the wide and establishing the lighting and getting some rehearsals. And, you're actually starting off with the coverage. And that means because in television, you might have 2 hours, 3 hours to shoot a scene. You're spending the most amount of time normally on the first setup, like getting into that setup. So you're spending all the important time on the faces. You're getting both sides of a conversation. So you're spending maybe half of that 3 hours you might spend in that first setup. And that's when you actually rehearse and try some things out. So you get the base, you might do 8 or 9 takes, trying and playing things out. And everyone goes, you know what, take 7 was the best where you did that other alt line. Let's stick with that. And then you kind of apply that to the other coverage. You might do some closer coverage, you might do some wider coverage. But that kind of model where you're cross shooting, the actors know that they can free play a little bit. They know that they're going to get a take where they can riff and do whatever they want. So it kind of creates a kind of a pattern that they can work with. And that creating that space is a really important part of what we do as cinematographers, making it so that I kind of just want to get out of the way, really. I want to set up a space where they can do their thing
Yeah.
and they're not thinking about having to hit a mark or having to do things in a certain way. Like there are shows where that is important, and that is not important for this show. Well, it's not as important. It's not that it's not important. It's just that what's important is actually the naturalism of that performance. And because the show goes between, in the same scene, you get whiplash from the kind of comedy or the pathos in the same moment, and that's the strength of the show. And so we have to
Yeah.
allow for that in the process, in the way that we shoot it. And of course, we want it to look good. And of course, we're using the camera to tell stories, but that's the kind of pattern that we go to. Sometimes we'll do some elaborate Steadicam shot. We had a whole sequence in the last season where Harrison's character wants to have his last kind of time out driving a car for himself. So he goes to a kind of a racing track and drives a car
Yeah.
really
Yeah. Yeah.
fast with Jimmy. So that's not the kind of standard day of coverage where you're going to do that kind of pattern. But, you get to elaborate and have those kind of more filmic and cinematic kind of storytelling beats. But then the kind of meat and potatoes of the comedy of the show and the engine of the show, that there is a kind of formula that we have. And that comes back to that manifesto we talked about. It's actually literally spelled out in that document. That's the thing we share with the directors. This is how we say, this is the model. This is how we do the show. And you're welcome to try something else, but this is what we found is working for the show.
It reminds me of historically the idea of the multi-camera production, the multi-camera like sitcom
Yeah.
um, came from I Love Lucy,
Yes.
came from Des Arnaz and Lucille Ball because they were vaudeville performers and they wanted that freedom to walk about a stage and be
Yeah.
in a stage and just have camera handling coverage for wherever they were. So they
Yeah.
put 3 cameras out there so that they could feel like they were dealing in front of an audience and just do their comedic thing.
Yeah. So that's kind of exactly what we're trying to do is for me as a cinematographer, I try to think of lighting the space rather than lighting the face. Of course, we try and take care of people, but if you light the space and you light it in a naturalistic way, which is what the show's visual aesthetic is anyway, it kind of is this kind of enhanced naturalism.
Hmm.
You're lighting through the windows. You're not trying to put lights in on stands in the shot. then that means you can give the actors the freedom to kind of almost go wherever they like and try something out in the shot. And it's about giving the actors that performance space and making it more theatrical in the way that we do it. And Bill has a great, if you've spoken to his editors, I don't know how much of the magic they've shared, but he has a really amazing technique for editing as well, and he really takes advantage of that. And we often shoot with three cameras, so we actually have on a two-hander you might have two medium shots going, and then the third camera is doing a profile or it's doing some other. I'm going to call it non-traditional television coverage. You're not just getting a close up. You might be getting a detail of what they're handling with their hands. That third camera might be handheld while the other two cameras are in studio mode, and it gives you like a condiment or some seasoning for the scene. And so if you need to make a gear shift, if something dramatic has happened in the
Mhm.
scene, you can just go to this kind of handheld profile shot, and it is a great device for giving you that. And again, it doesn't really affect the space in terms of the performances. You can accommodate that pretty easily from a lighting point of view, and still have it looking great. And it just gives us the ability to kind of shoot less takes, and especially with comedy too. You don't want to wear out the actors. It's always the
Sure.
funniest in the first line. That's why we start with those kind of medium close coverage shots, because it's always funnier early on. The more you say the jokes, the less funny they get, no matter how well they perform.
But I think it's interesting because you mentioned that idea of like shooting the hands or shooting, a leg or shooting something that's happening in there, and those are sometimes the real gems in the editing of just
Yeah,
like,
and
hey,
they're found in performance. Like we're watch ends. I often operate that third camera myself, and I'm watching as the first couple of takes go, and I notice it's like, Jason's doing this funny jittering thing with his hand, or um,
yeah,
Harrison, who's fantastic at playing the Parkinson's. He might be doing something with his jitters and his shakes. So I'll be like, okay, I've got to go and get that. And so you try and build that into the coverage, and again, that's just reacting to what the actors are doing. It's giving them the space to allow them to play around and do things, and then just capture what they do, and be in a position to do that without having to labor it too much, and ask them to do it 1,500 times.
you're shooting with the Blackmagic Ursa, which is
Yeah,
a
there's a lot
bold
of
idea.
firsts. Yeah,
I
a lot of
love this
firsts with it.
camera. It's one of I like what Blackmagic is putting out. I'm a diehard fan. I like the Pocket Cinema, but I also have the Ursa and the Ursa Broadcast. It's a fantastic camera.
Yeah.
What drew you to it?
Well, I've been I many of the people at Blackmagic are friends of mine. They're an Australian company, so I've known them for a long time. I've been very close to the development since their very early days. So I've had a lot to do with them over the years, and I've used their cameras as kind of, I have a very like I'm going to say camera agnostic approach. So I've often had lots of different camera brands intermixed within scenes. I've often shot scenes where I've got both an Arriflex and a Blackmagic, or a Sony and a Panasonic camera shooting at the same time. So it's always been something that I've been more interested in because of the physicality of the camera. I've always liked their Blackmagic cameras because they make a small, very high quality, uncompressed, tiny camera. And that gets me shots I can't easily replicate in terms of the handling and the ballistics. So that's where it started. But what they've done with this current camera, the Ursa Cine 12K LF, has they've kind of finally matured, I think, enough to make a camera. The image quality's always been great. It's always been really good. Where they've sort of struggled a little bit with the persnickety film, high-end film users, is all of the kind of niceties that the focus pullers want in terms of being able to have, accessibility and the ability to kind of option the camera and mount it. So the actual image quality for a cinematographer has been great forever. It's really just the kind of utility. And this camera has finally addressed a lot of that, which is all to do with really boring things like, power accessories and having enough kind of
Yeah.
extra outputs and those kind of things that they don't sound very sexy, but that's kind of been a bit of a barrier to higher end productions using their cameras. Of course, a lot of people have made do because the image quality is so good, they kind of work around those shortcomings that were there before. And you got to remember too, it's not like Blackmagic don't know that those issues exist, but they're making a camera for a certain price point. So they got to make some choices.
Yeah.
Okay, we want to sell it for 2 grand or 3 grand. Then this is what it has to be. This is what we can. This is how we can afford to make this camera. And in an era where a lot of companies are really struggling to do well, they're doing great. They're doing great
Yeah.
business. So this camera though is what's great is that it's their own custom sensor, and the color science is fantastic with this camera. And the nice thing about using it as the principal camera is you're not trying to make it match another camera. I'm just using it at its own strengths for its own best kind of imaging techniques, and the image that you get out of it is you're not trying to kind of make it look like an Arri or make it look like a Sony. It's just going to stand on its own feet. So I really like the idea of just going back to the idea of having just that one camera platform that we're kind of working with. That was a nice thing to do. It's really the first time I believe that Warner Brothers have also signed off on using the Blackmagic RAW codec just for their archival. We had to go through a whole kind of permissions process to get that approved. I believe it's the first time they've accepted 8K masters. So the actual masters that are delivered for archive are in 8K, which again is like a nice add-on. It's like it
Hmm.
wasn't necessarily the goal, but it was nice to have that ability, I guess, to future-proof things a little bit more. So there's lots of kind of reasons why we ended up using the camera. I actually just like the look of the camera, and I like the physical size of it and the color science, the way it works. And there's other advantages to it. And by the end, the crew really grew to like it a lot, and it was very reliable. I actually took the same set of equipment and cameras from the third season of Shrinking. We went straight on to another season of Bad Monkey. So all of those cameras have done a year of solid
Yeah.
production now, and they're in great condition. There's a kind of always been this perception that the kind of quality or the utility of the cameras, they weren't sort of built to the same standards, but we've trashed them, and they've done great. They haven't really stopped working.
Are you going to go up to the 17K now? The new
Um,
Blackmagic Ursa
I've
17K?
I've looked at it. I actually find the lens options. I don't love. I like the idea of that larger sensor, but I don't love the limitations. Like it's very hard to get very long lenses. It's very hard to get you can't really get zooms. They're really hard to come by that can cover
Yeah.
that sensor. So for me, it goes back to being this giant big camera again, because the lenses are all these kind of medium format giant lenses. I actually really like the smaller sizes, and in
Yeah.
fact the Ursa is kind of at the a higher limit of what I like to do. The 12K. So, I'll certainly look at it for the show. Like I think every show, and every season of every show has a different set of demands, and so it's nice to have as an option. And I really like that. Really for the first time they've made an affordable. Genuine large format. I mean, they call the 12K a large format, but I kind of think of those camera 65, 70 mil sensors as actually being the large format sensors. They've made it affordable. Before that camera came out, you could only rent, an Alexa 65, and really there's really no other options other than the Fuji have released theirs, which has got, is interesting, but also has some limitations. And there's just not a lot of options out there. So it's great that they've made that as an option for people to be able to have.
In terms of the show and the writing and kind of the crafting of the show, there is a lot of emotional therapy in the show. And I asked the editors about this. I remember after the first season was over, my immediate thought was I need to call my dad and have a conversation with him. Do
Yeah,
you
it's
find
amazing how
yourself
that
getting
works.
caught up in the
Yeah.
emotional therapeutic
Well,
sense?
that's what's
Like,
brilliant about what Bill has done, and also, the other writers as well. And I keep referring to Bill, but of course, there's actually a team of writers that are involved with this. Brett Goldstein was also a
Brett Goldstein, yeah.
co-creator. Neil Goldman is the kind of other lead writer. But yeah, I mean, what's great about what they've done is they've kind of made it possible to have conversations about therapy, about going to therapy. I had a dolly grip who is like the cliche of, a guy that would never ever be talking about his feelings, telling me that he was thinking about going to therapy to deal with some, anger stuff that he's had through. So, just because they've been around the show, that truth is there because all of the words that Harrison has when he's talking about therapy, and all of the scenes of therapy in this, they all come from truth. They are based
Yeah.
on a real character. They're based on the actual words that are spoken by real therapists and the techniques. Now they're doing them in a wildly inappropriate way, which is where the comedy comes
Sure.
from. Of course, from an ethical point of view, they're not applying them in the right way, but the ideas are very sound therapeutic ideas, and by normalizing those conversations and playing with those kind of ideas and outcomes, it actually makes it possible to have a conversation about those things. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the show is that they've kind of normalized a conversation about therapy or having a therapist as well. And also, too, I think they've shown that therapists are not, these kind of superhuman people that are holier than
Yeah.
thou and tell you how to live your life, because they're probably just they're going through the same struggles that you and I are going through as well. They just have some techniques that you can kind of go through to deal with it, and that's what's kind of great about it too for me.
I've been a camera person for 30 years and I fell in love with cinema. I heard there was free film school in France and I wanted to get into the French film school. I really didn't know anything at the time, but I knew at least how to take pictures. So I said, I'll try for the image department. And then when I miraculously got into the French film school, I fell in love with working with the camera. You're following what's going to be in the movie. So that immediacy that the camera allows is what I loved from the beginning. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and this is my course about documentary cinematography.
John, if you this is kind of a silly question, but if you weren't a cinematographer and you were going to go on some other course of your life, or maybe as a young person you decided, I had a dream that was somewhere else there. If tomorrow you woke up and cinematography was not an option, would there be some other career that you would desperately want to pursue?
I think for a long time, when I was younger, I wanted to be a photographer. And so cinematography is already my like, oh, actually, this is my other career. Because for a long time, I was really pushing hard towards becoming a photographer. I was very interested in photography and doing my own darkroom work and skills. And a lot of my skills from photography are what got me to being the cinematographer I am now. But I think today, if I was made redundant through a great AI cataclysmic event, I'd probably go off and like roast coffee beans. People who know me probably know how obsessed I am by coffee. I'd be a coffee roaster or a barista of some kind. You don't want to know what's on the camera truck with my coffee setup. It puts many cafes to shame. I'm embarrassed, but I am from Melbourne, which is the self-appointed fascist coffee capital of the world. So I
That's
have
fair.
an excuse.
That's fair. If I ever come to Australia, you have to make me a cup of coffee.
Oh
That's
yeah, well you can come to set. I'll make you one on the back of the truck. It's pretty good.
fantastic. Um, Thank you again, John, so much for talking to us today. We're here with John Brawley, cinematographer of Bad Monkey, The Morning Show, and of course, the show we're talking about today, Shrinking. Again, my name is Chad Anderson. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Filmmaker U. You can catch us out on filmmakeru.com or follow us again on Instagram at filmmaker_u. That is a show. John, thank you so much again. John Brawley. Everybody
Thank you
else,
so
take
much.
care and
See you.